For the past 2 weeks, we've been looking at an objection that skeptics often raise to cosmological arguments. Specifically, in response to the conclusion that God made the universe, they asked the question, well then who made God? And for the past 2 episodes, we've looked at that question specifically from the perspective of the kalam argument. And what we've seen is that because the universe at some point in the past had a beginning, it requires a cause. But because God is eternal, he doesn't. So in relation to the kalam argument, the answer to the question, who made God, is no one. This week I want to look at how this objection would be raised against the Leibnizian form of the cosmological argument. Now, it's going to take a little bit longer than usual to walk through all of these steps, but breaking this episode up would just be downright confusing, so we're going to go a little bit long today. Now, by way of reminder, William Lane Craig summarized the Leibnizian form of the argument as follows. Number 1. Anything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. Number 2. If the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Number 3. The universe exists. Number 4. Therefore, the universe has an explanation of its existence. And number 5. Therefore, the explanation of the existence of the universe is God. Unlike the kalam version, Leibniz speaks in terms of explanations, not causes. So if we were to modify the skeptical objection to speak to explanations, we'd be asking, if God explains the universe, then what explains God? When the objection is phrased this way, our answer is going to be a little bit different than it was for kalam. And this is going to take us all the way back to episode 28, when we talked about Leibniz's principle of sufficient reason. Take a look back at that episode for a more detailed explanation, but we talked there about the difference between contingent entities and necessary entities. A contingent entity is something that does not have to exist. A necessary entity, on the other hand, is something that must exist. For example, the laws of logic or mathematics arguably are necessary entities. It's impossible to even envision a reality in which they don't exist. As a matter of fact, if you wanted to present an argument against the laws of logic, you would have to use those same laws of logic. So any attempt is going to wind up being self-defeating. Now, the universe is a contingent entity. Because it came into existence at some point in the past, it is at least conceivable that this event may never have happened, and the universe may have never come into being. God, however, is necessary. Now, this is going to take a little bit longer to explain. God created the universe, including time. Now, if he created time, then he can't be stuck within time, meaning he can exist timelessly. Norman Geisler has explained this as God seeing all things, past, present, and future, simultaneously in what he calls his eternal now. Now, because God exists timelessly, he, unlike the universe, doesn't require a beginning point in time. And if God has no beginning point, then he's always existed, and nothing could have caused him to come into existence. That's part 1. Part 2 of our explanation takes us back to last week, when we saw that we can't have an eternal regression of causes. In order for any causal chain to begin, there needs to be a first cause to start the process. So as a matter of logical necessity, there must be a first cause. We can put all this together in the form of a deductive argument. Number 1. As a matter of logical necessity, there must be a first cause. Number 2, because God has existed eternally, nothing else can have caused him. Number 3, therefore the first cause must be God. And number 4, therefore God must exist necessarily. This final conclusion follows from the fact that if the first cause must exist necessarily, and if God must be that first cause, then God must exist necessarily. So unlike the universe, which is contingent, God is a necessary being. His necessity is his explanation. At the outset of this episode, we asked the question, if God explains the universe, then what explains God? Now, the answer to this question is, God is explained by the necessity of his own nature. In other words, as the first cause, he simply must exist. Now, if we look back at the way William Lane Craig phrased premise 1 of the Leibnizian argument, we see this idea included. Craig said, anything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. Because the universe is contingent, it needs to look to an external cause for the explanation of its existence. But because God is a necessary being, he is explained by the necessity of his own nature. So God does have an explanation for its existence. It's just a different explanation than the explanation for the universe. Now, next week, we're going to look at another common catchphrase that's advanced by skeptics, the claim that arguments are not evidence. See you next week. God bless.